This is Keith Helwig from Cops Corrections Videos. If you like my videos, please hit the red subscribe button. Today I'd like to talk about something which has raised controversy in certain segments, and that has to do with the hiring of felons, ex-felons, as correctional officers. Now I know a lot of people are going to disagree with what I say. A lot of people maybe don't want to understand what I'm saying or agree with what I'm saying, and that's fine. We don't all have to agree. Prisons serve several purposes. First and foremost is as punishment for offenders, security, and rehabilitation. Now often as security staff, we like to think of the rehabilitation efforts as the hug-a-thug. Well, believe me, I am not a hug-a-thug type of person. I was a line officer and a line supervisor for 36 years. And I was never considered a hug-a-thug. When I was a sergeant, I was a member of a team that they called the body snatchers. If an inmate needed to be taken out and put in segregation or whatever, I was one of the people they called. Later as a supervisor, my people knew that they could depend on me to go in with them on any situation. They knew I had their back, and I knew I had their back. But this brings me back to my main point, hiring ex-offenders, ex-felons as correctional officers. Now when I started in corrections back when God was a kid, I had a person in my class who had been an ex-felon. This person's name was Pablo. Now Pablo had served a sentence of almost 10 years for statutory rape. Now this was back in the 70s. Pablo's statutory rape was that he was 18 years old and he had sex with his 16-year-old girlfriend. So they put him away for a few years. Well, Pablo did his time. He didn't get in trouble when he did his time. When he got out, he got a good job, he established a family, and he was out for probably 10 years. During that time, he proved himself to be a good, reliable member of society, and he was hired as a correctional officer. Now, the caveat was that he couldn't work towers, he couldn't work armed posts, he could not be a member of the emergency response unit, things of that nature. But there were plenty of other positions inside of the prison that he could work. If you've read my book, my first book, No Place Like Home, one of the characters in there is based on someone who'd been convicted of car theft when they were 19 years old. His name was Phil. Now Phil had served, I think, 4 or 5 years in prison. And again, he'd been out for 9 or 10 years. He'd proved himself to be a valuable member of society. He never reoffended. And he became an officer. He was a good officer. He was an officer that I knew had my back. He was an officer that I knew I could depend on. Wisconsin, for a while, I don't know if they do it any longer, but didn't have a problem hiring offenders as long as they'd been out of prison for a substantial length of time, and during that length of time had not reoffended. They'd broken off any ties to gangs. Generally, they had been out long enough, so most of the people that they knew in prison were going to be gone anyways. And they were actually a valuable asset. Who better than an ex-inmate knows the mindset of an inmate? These guys were good. They were good people to work with. In fact, we had an individual who, at one point, he was my captain. He'd served a few years for car theft when he was a young man. He eventually went on from captain to security director to deputy warden to warden. He worked as a security chief in Madison. He proved himself to be a valuable member of society. You know, we often forget the rehabilitation aspect of corrections. Personally, if an inmate, an ex-inmate, has shown themselves to be a good, responsible citizen, if they've not reoffended, if they've had a steady job, good family, no negative contact with law enforcement, and they have turned their life around. They have become rehabilitated. I see no reason why they could not make an effective correctional officer. As I said, being ex-felons, they can't work in posts that are armed posts. As correctional officers, you know, there's the greatest majority of posts in a prison have absolutely nothing to do with firearms. They have to do with common sense. They have to do with dealing with individuals. So my opinion is that if an ex-offender wants to be a correctional officer and they've shown themselves to be a upstanding citizen, a a person who wants to do good, a person who wants to make a contribution, a person who wants to make a difference, I say we should give them that opportunity. Until next time, this is Keith Howard. Stay safe and watch your backs.